You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. Tonight, here on Channel 12, CBS will air the first part of a 4-hour miniseries, Sally Hemings, An American Tragedy. The series explores the intimate and fruitful relationship of Thomas Jefferson, principal author of the Declaration of Independence, founder of the University of Virginia and third president of the United States, and Sally Hemings, a woman enslaved by Jefferson. Over the last few years, many white Americans have struggled to cope mentally and emotionally with the idea that Jefferson and Hemings were sexually intimate and produced a family of children whose descendants have scattered across the United States. Because Jefferson is involved, America's deepest taboo is thrown under a glaring light. But as a colonial social historian educated in Virginia, William and Mary, not UVA by the way, I have to tell you, this stir amazes me. Does any honest person really think sexual relations between whites and blacks, masters and the people they enslaved, were rare? The fuss about Jefferson and Hemings tells us more about ourselves than it does about them. In an effort to explore the realities of life in a slave society, I sat down with Edward Ball, the author of the 1998 book entitled Slaves in the Family, when he visited Cincinnati 2 weeks ago. Between 1698 and 1865, the Balls accumulated huge wealth based on the proceeds of 20 rice plantations strung out along the Cooper River northwest of Charleston and the labor of nearly 4,000 slaves over 167 years. Mr. Ball writes that slavery is a piece of unfinished business for Americans, which is neither ours nor theirs, but a shared history. I began by asking him, how difficult is it to share that history between two groups of people?
Well, it's not easy because there is a dividing line in the memories of black people and the memories of white people of slavery. White people think something happened and black people think a different thing happened. So it was hard to find common ground. What I did as a descendant of slave owners was to try to find descendants of the people who were enslaved by our ancestors and share the stories that I had carried from my family and ask them to share their stories and see if there was any overlap. In some cases there was tremendous overlap, but in a lot of cases there was no overlap at all. Our family did not remember the violence that we perpetrated against black people, whereas many black families remember that very clearly. We told ourselves that we were the families that Gone with the Wind was about. We were the gallant men on horseback. We were the women in silk chiffon dresses. We were not the people who held the bullwhips. We were not the men who had non-consensual sex with black women whom we owned. The reality is, although we were also the men on horseback, we were also the people who did terrible things. And I thought that we had to clear the decks. And I, by an accident of birth, I was the one who decided to try to do it.
I found very interesting the way that you refer to people, refer to what I think most historians would say, the slaves. You refer to them almost always as the people. And you refer to it not as the slave quarters, but the village of the people, and certain places as work camps rather than plantations, which I think conjures up that Gone with the Wind imagery for whites. Right. How conscious was that? How much did you struggle with how you referred to people and places?
People were not slaves. They were people who were enslaved. Africans who arrived at the coast were not slaves. They were Africans who were captive. And so I call them captives.
You know, given that thing about language and either the richness or the paucity of language, and you make the point that certain terms have dropped out of our usage, mulatto, quadroon, whereas if we went to Latin America, there would be lots, not only those words, but lots of others. Right. Are we, as American English right now, not only impoverished as a language, but does that indicate we're impoverished as a way to understand what has happened, taken place?
Well, I don't know. I think that the language changes over time. My mother's family are from New Orleans, and in New Orleans there was a whole range of terms to refer to light-skinned black people. Octoroon, right, meaning 1/8 black. Now, Negro is a word that went out of favor in about 1965, replaced by the word black. I think it's all right to use the old words, but only when referring to the society of the day. You can say, I believe, a quadroon if you're referring to some instance in the past between two people.
But the interesting thing to me is, if you can't say mulatto, if you can't say quadroon, because you don't even know the words, what you're basically saying is, I can't imagine that whites and blacks were sexually intimate and had children. Mm-hmm. You've blocked it from your mind, is right, what struck me.
Yeah. It's not something that invites an easy solution. I use the phrase mixed race, which is inadequate to describe the kinds of sexual relationships that produced children who had white fathers and black mothers. It's almost scientific, but you're not going to find a term that you're totally satisfied with. Mulatto derives from the Latin word for mule, and black people find that offensive, and as they should. In its day, mulatto was thought, a mulatto was thought by white people to be a half-breed, and in that sense, like a mule. Now, do we want to use that word today to talk about people with white parents and black parents? I'm not sure.
Along this line, CBS is going to have on air this month a special about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And certainly over the last 3 or 4 years, Americans seem to be absolutely obsessed with the fact that, did they or didn't they? One, what does that tell us about America today that, gee, we just can't come to grips? And secondly, what does your own family history, how does that put that story into some sort of context and light?
Well, the biggest taboo in families such as mine was and is what we used to call miscegenation. White men sleeping with black women. And very, very occasionally, although almost never, white women sleeping with black men. So whenever that taboo is transgressed, it's fascinating, not only for we Southerners, but probably for the whole of America. Because this is a taboo that the whole society has inherited. Do not cross the race line. In my own family, I found enough evidence to support that some of our ancestors, men, had had sexual relationships with black women whom they owned that had produced mixed-race children. I didn't make a special effort to find this out, but I began to hear from black families stories that their ancestors included Ball family men and black women. And I took those stories. This was 3 or 4 years ago when I was first writing Slaves in the Family. And I went to the Ball family papers, some 10,000 pages of records, including correspondence and lists of slaves and diaries, and looked for circumstantial evidence that might corroborate, prove, or disprove the stories that black people were telling me. And in the case of 2 families, I found enough evidence.
One case involved James Poyas, a 4th-generation Ball, the master of Limerick Plantation in the 1830s and 40s, and Dinah, a field hand who herself had a white father. They had 2 children. Their son, Frederick Poyas, became the patriarch of a family that has thrived into the 6th generation, spreading outward from South Carolina into Pennsylvania and Ohio. The descendants of Dinah shared their stories with Edward Ball.
I think probably in the majority of cases, the relationships between white men and black women during slavery, sexual relationships, we would have to characterize them as rape by current terms. Now, if I am a slave owner and I force a black woman to have sex with me, I'm not going to write this down in my diary, and I'm probably not going to tell my wife. So very little written evidence remains. Furthermore, white families did not pass down oral tradition about the men who had forced sex with black women. When those things happen, they cut those stories off. So families like mine and the white Jeffersons had no oral tradition that stated we have black cousins or our male ancestors had non-consensual sex with black women. Black families, on the other hand, often pass these stories down, as Sally Hemings' descendants did. So the evidence for forced sex usually comes from the oral tradition of black families. Historians are very suspicious of oral tradition. I think that one lesson of the Thomas Jefferson-Sally Hemings case is that we have to listen more carefully to what families are telling us. Black families had no access to literacy. They could not write down that their aunt had a mixed-race son with the master. They told the story to their children, and we have to start listening more carefully to those stories. The reality is that the early history of America is full of interracial relationships, and we are much more a blood-connected society than we would like to admit. Everyone says that black people carry 25% white blood, and if you look at black society, you'll see faces of all colors. What people are less willing to admit is that a lot of white people carry black blood. The way it worked was this. A mixed-race child was born to a white man and a black woman. That child perhaps married someone light. Their son or daughter tried to pass, and they moved into white society, and they passed as white. Then they married white. And as a result, there are millions and millions of white Americans who don't know, but they do have black cousins and kin.
What is it that has to happen for us as a society to begin to come to grips with these deeper issues of slavery that shape the society because we experienced slavery for all those years? What is it has to happen?
I think testimony and truth-telling. The Americans, we like to believe that our history is heroic, that we invented freedom, that we are the country of individual liberty and opportunity, that anything is possible here. We have class mobility. But we're also a country with a tragic history. Our history is not just heroic, it's also tragic. The decimation of the Native Americans, the enslavement of millions and millions of black people that was allowed to continue for 200 years. And we have to start talking about the tragic stories as well as the heroic ones, because our country is both tragic and heroic.
As successful and wealthy rice planters, the descendants of Elias Redcap Ball married into other powerful South Carolina families. A daughter married Henry Lawrence, who is remembered in family lore for his success in politics, becoming the president of the Continental Congress during the Revolution, and his success in business as a merchant. In fact,
he was the largest slave trader in British colonial America. He imported some 10,000 people over a period of 10 years to the port of Charleston. I didn't know this.
you didn't
Now,
know.
I didn't know this, no. His fortune was built upon the slave trade. Interestingly, he was later a politician and was elected president of the Continental Congress. So he was a peer of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and Henry Adams and all those guys. So his life is significant because it embodies the contradictions in the founding of this country. We were a country founded on freedom and on imprisonment at the same time.
Right now, Cincinnati is very intrigued by this whole concept image of the Underground Railroad because of the effort locally here to build the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. In terms of the Underground Railroad for slaves in South Carolina, close to Charleston, on ball plantations along the Cooper River, how real, how much of a possibility was the Underground Railroad?
It was almost impossible to get out of the Carolinas north to a non-slave state, to a free state. We were so far south, and a person would have had to travel 700 miles under the cover of night by foot to get out, at least if they were going north. Now, on the other hand, there was a time when Florida was a Spanish colony and an enemy of England in the early 1700s, and the Spaniards promised freedom to any slave who could get out of South Carolina and get to Florida, which was a distance of 200 miles. So hundreds and perhaps thousands of people did that. After 3 or 4 generations in slavery, black resistance took the form of sabotage. People would break tools, they would make a work slow down, they would get up late, they would plant the wrong thing, they would feed the animals the wrong food. If they ran away, they were often recaptured within 2 or 3 days. So resistance was on an individual level. Only very occasionally was there an attempt at a mass revolt, because the repercussions were so savage that it took heroic will to try to organize a revolt. The conspirators in the uprisings were slaughtered. They were slaughtered like cattle.
After going through this process of a number of years to prepare this book that is not only a history, but also so personal, where does it leave you?
I, like most Americans, was raised in a separate society, in a white society. And I joke with my black friends now that writing this book is a funny way to meet black people. But it's made me more whole. I move more easily in black society. I feel at peace with myself and what I've done, and I feel good.
Well, thanks for being here, and this is a great book. Look forward to the next one.
Thanks very much.
With knowledge, wit, and a winning smile, Thane Maynard has become the human face of the Cincinnati Zoo, even during tough levy campaigns. Before he leaves for Seattle, Thane visits one last time after the break.
Look at those eyes.
What a great creature. I keep
Look
trying
at
to turn him toward the
those
light. Oh, it's okay.
Oh,
He's good.
my
Yeah,
God.
he's got you there. Well, how about this? I'll take him back. That's great. He likes you. He thinks you're green and look like a tree. Will you spray him just a little bit with water, because
Frog
the
water.
lights could,
See, everybody,
the lights
it
could
is
dry
the
him out.
frog water.
Now, one reason there, it's good.
God,
That's
he
all right.
really
It's
likes
okay.
this
He won't hurt you.
jacket, doesn't
He
he?
won't hurt you.
Animals and live TV are a great combination, as Channel 12 anchor Gwen Ellis found back in 1997. And when you mix in Thane Maynard, it's just about perfect. 10 days ago, Thane announced that after 22 years as an educator at the Cincinnati Zoo, he's accepted a position as the director of the new Puget Sound Environmental Learning Center in Seattle, Washington. I asked him to come back one more time. Thane,
Hi, Dan.
welcome back.
Thanks
and by
for
the
having
way,
me.
I was asked by management to see if you could check to see if there's any little critters still here, or that you
I
left
think we
by.
took them all back, but I chose not to bring one today just because
Right.
we have had a lot of fun. And hey, you guys have dressed this place up since the last time I was here.
Oh, you've noticed.
Very nice. Very nice. Well,
Listen, tell us about the new position. What is the organization? Because I understand it's a new organization. What is it that has grabbed you?
it's a neat opportunity. This is not going to be a zoo, but it is basically the same thing I've done for 22 years here, which is combining nature and children. It is a children's center, a resident outdoor education center. It hasn't yet been built, so it's pretty exciting. We're going to build it. It's on 256 acres on Bainbridge Island, which is right off the coast of Seattle. And it'll be for 3 classrooms of kids at a time, 90 to 100 students, principally 4th and 5th graders, who will come and spend a week. They'll come for 5 days and 4 nights.
Spend a week at a time.
Right.
So this is very intensive. The curriculum is really
Yeah, it'll really be neat. And you know, in many, many places, including right here in Cincinnati, many schools will take their kids, whether it's 4th, 5th, or 6th grade, and go to an outdoor education site and center and do a variety of things. But this one really will be special. It's going to emphasize, of course, nature and ecology, but also technology, which they know a little bit about in the Northwest, and creative arts, because that really ties with kids that age. So it's a new project, but it really is an exciting one.
And is this a project that you've had some connection with over the past couple of years? Have you helped sort of brainchild this thing?
No, I haven't. Some great people have worked on it. It's really being pushed forward in the vision stage by a woman named Debbie Brainerd, who's chairman of the board of the project, and I'll be executive director. And so we're just in the process of really finishing up the details on the facility. You know, they'll have a series of 5 classrooms for when there's indoor work. They'll have 3 lodges for a classroom each to spend those 4 nights, as well as other, you know, an auditorium and a variety of activity centers, even a creative arts center where kids can do art. And I live with an 11-year-old, so I know it's exactly the right age for kids to do creative arts. So what we'll do now is obviously get that built over the next year and a half. It's due to open in September 2001, but then form the whole program.
This isn't a zoo, so you don't have, you know, elephants and giraffes.
That's right. I'm going to have to get a new belt buckle. I've had this
Right.
elephant belt buckle my daughter gave me about a decade ago, and I'll have to find one with a salmon on it.
Out there, you better.
Yeah.
You're going to miss some of that? Because zoos are different than this
Sure,
sort of thing.
sure. It's interesting. They are non-concentric circles, but with a huge overlap in terms of what we do, which is to get kids excited about nature. And I am an old zoo guy, so I wouldn't be surprised as time passes if we end up with some animals. For instance, everywhere in the country, people end up with injured birds of prey. Now here, that might be as big as a great horned owl and as small as a screech owl, or a little kestrel, which is a small falcon. Out there, you could even end up with a bald eagle, which live right on Bainbridge Island, where we're going to live and do this.
Yeah, if people have not been to Seattle, they don't realize that you're trading for a absolutely incredibly beautiful place. And I know what Ken Griffey's doing the other way.
Yeah.
But
Well,
Seattle,
I was the player.
Seattle and Boston.
I was the player that wasn't named in the trade.
You were
down here, exactly. You know, I can't hit a curveball, but I'll chase him down in the outfield. It is a neat opportunity for my family, for my kids, for my wife and me to see another part of the world, see orcas on a daily basis, see bald eagles on a daily basis. But I would say this, you know, we leave with great sadness. Cincinnati is a great town. I showed up here 22 years ago. I had a lot of hair. You and I both had hair.
Yep.
And folks have welcomed me in. We had a lot of fun right here in this room telling people about wildlife.
Actually, I really respect what you've done, and I've sometimes thought our careers have somewhat paralleled each other in the sense of both coming out of these academic environments, working in museums or zoos, but trying to use media to get to people. It's not about the things as much as about communicating with people. Is that really what you see? Is it really the education part more than just the animals, or for me, the artifact?
Sure. I think it really is, Dan, you know, the idea of telling the story. Workplaces are just like a forest or an ecosystem where different organisms have different niches. Everybody can't do exactly the same thing. So in fact, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a hard-boiled scientist. If people have a really tough question about the subspecies of an organism from Central Africa, they never ever call me. They call specialists. On the other hand, if they need somebody to tell the crowd about that subspecies and why it's important and how it might fit in with some other things, how a caterpillar in the forest actually plays an integral role with a mountain gorilla, I can tell the story.
Now, in the case of, Cincinnati Zoo, you've been there for 22 years. It's gone through a tremendous change in those 22 years in terms of the exhibitry and the programming. It's just incredible. What's the future of the Cincinnati Zoo, though? I mean, all institutions, not-for-profits, face challenges. And I'm asking specifically with the thought that the aquarium in Newport has opened, which is a for-profit organization, not a not-for-profit.
Right.
Which may not make any difference to the visitor, but it makes a lot of difference to those of us who work in these kinds of institutions. What's the future of the Cincinnati Zoo?
Well, we're very fortunate on a couple of levels. One is nationwide, if not worldwide, but certainly nationwide. We're in the Renaissance days of zoos. Much like 100 years ago, the great move in America to build the big art museums and the big early natural history museums, such as the American Museum of Natural History in the early days of the Smithsonian. We're in that kind of a heyday for American zoos, whether it's in Cincinnati or it's in the Bronx or it's in San Diego, or even Disney built one called Disney's Animal Kingdom. So overall, the industry is really moving forward and thinking much bigger and thinking more broadly. In our case, our zoo is really positioned very well for the future. Though I will miss being here very much, and some of the things I do people might miss, but I'm leaving behind in my program, the whole education program, incredibly good guys. We've had a strong team for a long time. We've had enough pieces that we do, children's zoo, building exhibits, running a high school, doing all the other things such as overnights and school groups, that we've really had a model of tandem leadership, and that was me and a wonderful guy named Dave Janicki, who was my assistant director of education. Well, as of now, he's the director of education with me leaving, and a guy named Dan Marsh is the Assistant Director of Education. So we're positioned very well to continue and really strengthen those relationships with groups like Cincinnati Public. And overall, the zoo is in a very strong position looking into the future.
Thane, thank you, and good luck out in Seattle.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay, and thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week when we run up to the March 7th primary. Have a good week.
The leadership role is more of what's our priority, how are we really living that, how do we put first things first, and in our case, first things first is getting kids wet out in the woods.
Okay, I think we're running out of time, and listen,
Well,
Thane, I can't tell you how I have appreciated your work and how Cincinnati has appreciated your work, and we hope you come back and visit and maybe come back longer.
we will. Thanks.
Thank you for everything. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week as we run up to the March 7th primary. Have a good week.